The envelope in my mailbox had that familiar HOA logo stamped in the corner, and I already knew this wasn't going to be good news. I had moved into this suburban neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona about 2 years ago, thinking I had found the perfect place to settle down after my divorce. The house was a beautiful 3-bedroom ranch style with a decent backyard, and the neighborhood seemed quiet enough. What I didn't realize was that the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association was run by a woman named Patricia who treated the entire community like her personal fiefdom. I opened the letter right there by my mailbox, squinting in the afternoon desert sun. It was a violation notice. Apparently, my fence, which had been damaged during a monsoon storm last week, needed to be repaired within 30 days, or I would face daily fines of $50. Fair enough, I thought. The fence did look pretty bad, with 2 panels completely blown out and another one hanging at an odd angle. But then, I read the next paragraph and my blood started to boil. The letter stated in bold letters that all repairs must be completed using contractors from the HOA's approved vendor list. There were 3 companies listed, and I was required to get quotes from at least 2 of them before proceeding. Any work done by non-approved contractors would result in immediate fines and potential legal action. I stood there for a moment, letting this sink in. I had already called my buddy Jake, who ran a small contracting business in Temp. He had given me a fair quote of $800 to replace all 3 damaged fence panels with high-quality cedar wood. But apparently, that wasn't going to fly with Patricia and her board of HOA tyrants. The next morning, I decided to play along. I called the first company on the approved list, Desert Home Solutions. The woman who answered sounded bored and annoyed that I was interrupting her day. "Yeah, we can come out next week sometime," she said flatly. "Next week? The damage is pretty extensive. Can't someone come sooner?" "We're booked. Take it or leave it." I took it, scheduling an appointment for the following Tuesday. Then I called the second company, Premium Property Services. This time, a man answered with slightly more enthusiasm. "Fence repair. Sure, we can get you a quote. Our guy can swing by Thursday afternoon." "This Thursday?" I asked hopefully. "No, next Thursday, the one after that." I felt my frustration building. "That's almost 2 weeks away." "Well, sir, we're an in-demand company. Quality takes time." I gritted my teeth and made the appointment anyway. By the time both contractors finally showed up, I was already annoyed with the entire process. The guy from Desert Home Solutions barely looked at the fence, walked around it once with his hands in his pockets, and then quoted me $2,200 for the repair. $2,200. I repeated, certain I had misheard him. "That's right. Cedar's expensive, plus we have to account for permits, disposal of old materials, labor. It all adds up." The quote from Premium Property Services was even worse at $2,600. When I asked why it was so expensive, the contractor just shrugged and said something about premium materials and guaranteed workmanship. I went back inside my house and called Jake. "Hey man, you still available to do that fence?" "Sure thing, William. I can start this weekend if you want." The HOA is saying I have to use their approved contractors. The quotes I'm getting are insane, though. Over $2,000. Jake whistled low. "For 3 fence panels? Are they serious? I'm literally doing it for $800 and I'm making a decent profit at that price." Sounds like someone's getting kickbacks. That word hung in the air. Kickbacks, of course. It made perfect sense now. Patricia and the HOA board had set up this cozy little arrangement where they funneled all the repair work in the neighborhood to these specific companies. And those companies probably slipped them a nice cut under the table. It was a classic scam, and I was damned if I was going to participate in it. "Do the work," I told Jake. Come by Saturday morning and let's get this done. You sure? If the HOA is going to cause problems, let them. I'll deal with Patricia. That Saturday, Jake showed up at 8 in the morning with his truck full of beautiful cedar panels and all the necessary tools. By noon, my fence looked better than it had when I first bought the house. The work was clean, professional, and the price was fair. I paid Jake in cash. We shook hands, and I felt pretty good about myself for standing up to the HOA's little extortion scheme. The feeling lasted exactly 4 days. That's when I got the next letter, this one even more aggressive than the first. The HOA had apparently been monitoring my property, probably because Patricia lived just 3 houses down and could see my backyard from her kitchen window. The letter informed me that I had violated the HOA covenant by using an unauthorized contractor. I was being fined $500, and if I didn't have the fence replaced by an approved vendor within 2 weeks, the daily $50 fines would begin. I read the letter 3 times, each time getting angrier. They wanted me to rip out a perfectly good fence that had just been installed and pay one of their overpriced cronies to do the exact same work. It was insane. It was theft, and I wasn't going to stand for it. I decided to go straight to the source. That evening, I walked down to Patricia's house and rang her doorbell. She answered wearing a purple tracksuit and holding a glass of white wine, looking at me like I was something unpleasant she had found on the bottom of her shoe. "Can I help you?" she asked in that tone that made it clear she had no intention of helping me with anything. "Hi, Patricia. I'm William Garrison from down the street. I wanted to talk to you about this fine I received." "Oh, yes, the fence situation. Very unfortunate that you chose to disregard the HOA rules. With all due respect, I don't think it's reasonable to force homeowners to use specific contractors, especially when their prices are triple what everyone else charges." Patricia's expression hardened. "The approved vendors have been thoroughly vetted by the board. They carry proper insurance, they pull the correct permits, and they do quality work. We can't have just anyone working in our neighborhood bringing down property values. My contractor is licensed, insured, and does excellent work. The fence looks great." "That's not the point, William. The point is that you violated the rules that you agreed to when you purchased your home. The CCRs are very clear about this matter. CCRs. Covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I had signed them when I bought the house, but I'd be lying if I said I had read every single page of the dense legal document. Still, requiring specific contractors seemed like a stretch. "I'd like to dispute this fine," I said firmly. Patricia took a sip of her wine, and I swear I saw the hint of a smile on her face. "You can file a formal dispute with the board. We meet the 3rd Tuesday of every month. You'll have 5 minutes to present your case." "Fine, I'll be there." "Good luck," she said, and closed the door in my face. Over the next 2 weeks, I did my homework. I pulled up the HOA's CCRs and read through every single page. Buried in Section 7, subsection C, there was indeed language about using approved contractors for external modifications and repairs. However, the language was vague, and there was nothing that explicitly stated homeowners couldn't use their own contractors as long as the work met code requirements. I also did some digging into Desert Home Solutions and Premium Property Services. Both companies had been established within the last 3 years, right around the time Patricia had taken over as HOA president. I looked up their business registrations and found some interesting information. Desert Home Solutions was registered to a man named Richard Morrison. Premium Property Services was registered to someone named Linda Chen. I made note of both names. Then I started talking to my neighbors. I went door to door in my free time, introducing myself properly to people I had only waved to in passing before. I asked them if they had ever needed to do repairs or modifications, and what their experience with the HOA had been. The stories I heard were infuriating. A woman named Susan 2 streets over had been forced to repaint her house using an approved painter who charged her $9,000 for a job that should have cost $4,000. A young couple, the Hendersons, had to replace their driveway and got quoted $15,000 by the approved contractors. They ended up taking out a loan to cover it. Another neighbor, an older gentleman named Frank, told me he had tried to fight the HOA 3 years ago over a similar issue. "They buried me in legal fees," he said sadly. "I spent $5,000 on lawyers, and in the end, I just had to give up and use their contractors. Cost me another $8,000 for a simple roof repair. But here's the interesting part. Nearly everyone I talked to was fed up with the HOA. They felt trapped and exploited, but no one wanted to be the one to rock the boat. Patricia and her board ruled through intimidation and the threat of endless legal battles. I wasn't going to be intimidated. The night of the HOA board meeting, I showed up 15 minutes early with a folder full of documentation. The meeting was held in the community center, a bland beige building near the neighborhood entrance. When I walked in, Patricia was already seated at a long table with 4 other board members. I recognized 2 of them as neighbors I had seen around but never really talked to. About 20 other residents were scattered in the folding chairs facing the board. The meeting started with typical HOA business, approving the minutes from last month, discussing the budget for landscaping at the entrance, debating whether the community pool needed resurfacing this year or could wait another season. It was mind-numbingly boring. Finally, Patricia looked at her agenda and said, "We have one dispute to hear tonight. William Garrison regarding the fine assessed for unauthorized contractor use. William, you have 5 minutes." I stood up and walked to the front of the room. "Thank you for hearing me out. I'm here because I believe the fine I received is unjust and that the HOA's approved contractor policy is unreasonable and possibly illegal." Patricia's eyebrow raised slightly. One of the other board members, a man with a gray beard, leaned forward with interest. I continued, "When my fence was damaged in the storm, I did my due diligence. I called 2 approved contractors as required. One quoted me $2,200, the other $2,600. For comparison, I had already received a quote of $800 from a licensed and insured contractor I know personally. The work would have been identical." "The approved vendors carry additional insurance," Patricia interrupted. "They also guarantee their work through the HOA." "According to Arizona state law," I said, pulling out a printed document, "requiring homeowners to use specific contractors without legitimate safety or standardization reasons may constitute an illegal restraint of trade. The work that was done on my fence meets all building codes and was completed by a state-licensed contractor. The HOA has no grounds to require me to use more expensive vendors simply because they're on an approved list." The room had gotten very quiet. I could feel the other residents watching intently. Patricia's face had gone slightly red. "The CCRs are legally binding. You signed them." I did, and I've read them thoroughly now. Section 7, subsection C states that external modifications must be approved by the Architectural Committee and must meet community standards. It does not state that I must use specific contractors. It states that the work must be approved. "I'm happy to have my fence inspected to ensure it meets standards." The gray-bearded board member spoke up. "He has a point, Patricia. The CCRs do say the work must be approved, but I don't recall language requiring specific vendors. Patricia shot him a look that could have melted steel. The board has interpreted the CCRs to require approved vendors for quality control purposes. Then, I'd like to see the meeting minutes where the board voted on that interpretation, I said calmly, because that's not explicitly stated in the CCRs that I signed when I purchased my home. There was murmuring in the audience now. Patricia shuffled through some papers, clearly flustered. That's not how this works. You can't just waltz in here and demand to see internal board documents. Actually, another board member, a younger woman, said quietly, homeowners do have a right to review meeting minutes. They're supposed to be available upon request. Patricia glared at her too. I was starting to realize that Patricia had been running this board like her personal kingdom, and some of the other members were just now starting to push back. I propose this, I said. I'll pay for an independent inspector to examine my fence. If it meets all relevant building codes and HOA standards, the fine should be waived. If it doesn't, I'll pay to have it redone by an approved contractor. The gray-bearded man nodded. That seems fair. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but she could see that the rest of the board was warming to the idea. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. We'll arrange for an independent inspection. This meeting is adjourned. As people filed out, several residents came up to me quietly, thanking me for speaking up. One man shook my hand and said, "About time someone stood up to her." The inspection happened a week later. A licensed building inspector from a third-party company came out, examined my fence thoroughly, took measurements, checked the installations, and gave it a passing grade. The fence met all codes and standards. The HOA was forced to waive my fine, though Patricia made sure to send me a letter saying it was a one-time exception and future violations would not be tolerated. I wasn't done, though. Not by a long shot. I spent the next few weeks investigating Desert Home Solutions and Premium Property Services more thoroughly. I filed public records requests for their business licenses, permits they had pulled, and any complaints filed with the State Contractors Board. What I found was interesting, but not quite smoking gun material. Both companies had very few reviews online, and the reviews they did have seemed suspiciously generic and positive. Then I got lucky. I was at a sports bar in Scottsdale watching a Suns game when I struck up a conversation with the guy sitting next to me. His name was Marcus, and he mentioned he worked in construction. When I told him about my fence situation and the HOA drama, he laughed. Let me guess, Sunset Ridge. I nearly choked on my beer. How did you know, man? Everyone in the local contractor community knows about that HOA. Patricia Morrison runs that scam tight. Wait, Patricia Morrison. The HOA president is Patricia Anderson. Marcus shook his head. Anderson is her married name. Patricia Morrison is her maiden name. And Richard Morrison, the guy who owns Desert Home Solutions, that's her brother. There it was. The smoking gun I needed. I bought Marcus another beer and got all the details. Apparently, it was common knowledge among local contractors that Patricia had set up her brother's company and was funneling all the HOA work to him. Premium Property Services was owned by Linda Chen, who was Richard's business partner and girlfriend. They were making a fortune overcharging residents while Patricia got a cut under the table. Why hasn't anyone reported this? I asked. Marcus shrugged. Who's going to listen? HOAs basically operate with no oversight. Unless someone files a formal complaint or lawsuit, they just keep doing what they're doing. That night, I started drafting a formal complaint to file with the Arizona Attorney General's office. I documented everything. the relationship between Patricia and Richard Morrison, the inflated prices charged by the approved contractors, the testimonies from neighbors who had been overcharged, and the HOA's illegal requirement to use specific vendors. But I also knew that government complaints could take months or even years to investigate. I needed something faster. I needed to hit Patricia where it would hurt most, her stranglehold on the neighborhood. That's when I came up with the idea. I created a simple one-page flyer with a headline that read "Being overcharged for home repairs." Below that, I listed price comparisons. Fence repair, $800 versus $2,200, HOA approved. House painting, $4,000 versus $9,000, HOA approved. Driveway replacement, $6,000 versus $15,000, HOA approved. At the bottom of the flyer, I included information about Arizona law regarding HOA contractor requirements, and a note that residents had the right to use licensed contractors of their choice, as long as work met code requirements. I also included Jake's phone number and the numbers of several other reputable local contractors I had vetted. Then, I printed 500 copies and spent a Saturday morning walking the entire neighborhood, putting a flyer in every single mailbox. The response was immediate and explosive. By Sunday afternoon, my phone was ringing off the hook. Neighbors were calling to ask questions, thank me, and share their own horror stories about the approved contractors. Jake called me laughing, saying he had received over 30 calls in one day from Sunset Ridge residents asking for quotes. But the most satisfying call came Monday evening. It was Susan, the woman who had been overcharged $9,000 for painting her house. "William, I just wanted you to know, I'm filing a complaint against the HOA. After seeing your flyer, I talked to a lawyer. He says I have grounds to sue for the difference between what I paid and what the work should have cost." "That's great, Susan. We should all be holding them accountable. There's more. I talked to at least 10 other neighbors today. We're organizing. We're going to vote Patricia and her entire board out at the next election." This was music to my ears. The next HOA meeting was packed. The small community center could barely hold everyone who showed up. People were standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Patricia looked nervous for the first time since I had met her, her usual confident smirk replaced by a tight-lipped grimace. Before the official meeting could start, Frank, the older gentleman who had been buried in legal fees years ago, stood up and demanded to speak. "Point of order," he said loudly. "I'm calling for a special vote of no confidence in the current board." Patricia's face went pale. "That's not on the agenda. According to the HOA bylaws, any homeowner can call for a vote of no confidence with support from 10% of residents. I have signatures from 30% right here." He held up a thick stack of papers. The room erupted in applause. What followed was 3 hours of the most dramatic HOA meeting I had ever witnessed. Granted, I had only been to 2, but still. Resident after resident stood up to share their stories of being overcharged, intimidated, and financially hurt by the approved contractor scheme. Several people mentioned my flyer and thanked me publicly for exposing what had been going on. Patricia tried to defend herself, claiming she had acted in the community's best interest, that the approved contractors were vetted for quality, that this was all a misunderstanding. But when someone brought up the fact that Richard Morrison was her brother, she had no good response. "That's a conflict of interest," someone shouted from the back. "It's fraud," yelled another voice. The vote was called and it wasn't even close. Patricia and the entire board were removed from their positions by a vote of 87%. Interim board members were appointed on the spot, including Frank and Susan. The first motion passed by the new board was to eliminate the approved contractor list entirely, allowing residents to use any licensed and insured contractor they chose. I left that meeting feeling vindicated, but I knew this wasn't over. Patricia wasn't the type to go quietly. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from a law firm representing Patricia Anderson and the former HOA board. They were suing me for defamation and interference with business relationships, claiming my flyer contained false information and had cost them significant financial losses. I took the letter to a lawyer friend, David, who practiced civil law in downtown Phoenix. He read through it, set it down, and started laughing. "This is a joke," he said. "They have no case. Everything in your flyer was factual. You didn't make any false statements. And you didn't interfere with their business. You exercised your free speech rights to inform your neighbors about their options. So I shouldn't be worried. I wouldn't lose sleep over it, but you should file a countersuit. They're clearly trying to intimidate you." Arizona has strong anti-SLAPP laws that protect people from these kinds of frivolous lawsuits designed to silence critics. SLAPP stood for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. Essentially, it was a lawsuit filed not to win, but to burden the defendant with legal costs and shut them up. Arizona law allowed defendants to recover attorneys' fees if they could prove the lawsuit was frivolous. David agreed to represent me, and we filed a motion to dismiss along with a countersuit for attorneys' fees and damages. The whole thing was beautiful in its simplicity. We didn't just defend against their claims, we went on offense. Meanwhile, the new HOA board was busy cleaning house. They hired an independent auditor to review the association's finances, and what they found was staggering. Over the past 3 years, the HOA had paid out over $400,000 to Desert Home Solutions and Premium Property Services for various community projects. The auditor compared these costs to market rates and estimated that the community had been overcharged by at least 60%, possibly more. The auditor's report was distributed to all residents, and it sparked a firestorm. People were furious. The new board voted unanimously to file a lawsuit against Patricia, Richard Morrison, and Linda Chen for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. But things were about to get even more serious. One evening, I got a call from Susan. "William, you need to hear this." One of the neighbors, Jenny Richards, used to work for the county assessor's office. She started looking into property records for Patricia and Richard. You won't believe what she found. What? Patricia owns a second home in Sedona. Richard owns 3 rental properties in Tempe. All of them were purchased in the last 3 years, right when the approved contractor scheme started. We're talking over $2 million in real estate acquisitions. The implication was clear. Patricia and Richard had been pocketing so much money from their scheme that they had gone on a real estate buying spree. This wasn't just a conflict of interest or a little bit of corruption. This was large-scale fraud. The new HOA board took this information to the police. Within a week, a detective from the Phoenix Police Department's white-collar crime unit was interviewing residents and reviewing financial documents. I gave a statement, as did dozens of other homeowners. Jake and several other local contractors also provided statements about the market rates for various services and how much the approved contractors had been overcharging. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, Patricia and Richard kept their heads down, but the damage was done. Desert Home Solutions and Premium Property Services had lost almost all their business, not just from Sunset Ridge but from the entire area. Word had spread through the local community about the fraud, and no one wanted to work with them anymore. I heard through the grapevine that both companies were on the verge of bankruptcy. The lawsuit Patricia had filed against me was dismissed with prejudice in early October. The judge ruled that it was clearly a slap suit and ordered Patricia to pay my attorney's fees, which totaled about $12,000. David sent me a copy of the order with a note that said justice served. Then, in late November, the police made their move. I was having coffee in my kitchen on a cold Tuesday morning when I saw 3 police cars pull up to Patricia's house. Officers in plain clothes knocked on her door, and when she answered, they arrested her right there on her front steps. I learned later that Richard Morrison and Linda Chen were arrested simultaneously at their respective homes. The charges were serious: fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and multiple counts of violating Arizona's consumer protection laws. The prosecution alleged that Patricia, Richard, and Linda had conspired to defraud Sunset Ridge residents out of hundreds of thousands of dollars over a 3-year period. The local news picked up the story. HOA president arrested in contractor kickback scheme. Read the headline in the Arizona Republic. A reporter even came to the neighborhood to interview residents. Susan and Frank talked to the cameras, explaining how Patricia had operated and how residents had finally fought back. I declined to be interviewed, not because I was shy, but because I wanted to keep a low profile. I had done what I needed to do, and the justice system was taking care of the rest. The criminal trial began in March of the following year. I was called as a witness, along with Jake and about 20 other residents. The prosecution laid out a compelling case. They showed bank records proving that Patricia had received regular cash payments from Richard and Linda. They demonstrated the massive price discrepancies between the approved contractors and market rates. They brought in expert witnesses who testified that the work done by the approved contractors was often substandard despite the inflated prices. The defense tried to argue that Patricia had genuinely believed she was acting in the community's best interest, and that the payments from her brother were loans, not kickbacks. But the evidence was overwhelming. Emails recovered from Richard's computer showed explicit discussions about splitting profits and keeping prices high to maximize their take. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. Patricia was found guilty on all counts. Richard and Linda were also convicted. At sentencing, Patricia received 4 years in state prison and was ordered to pay restitution of over $300,000 to the HOA. Richard got 5 years and Linda got 3. Standing in that courtroom as the judge read the sentences, I felt a sense of closure. This had started as a simple dispute over a fence repair, and it had uncovered a massive fraud that had harmed dozens of families. But we had fought back, and we had won. Back in the neighborhood, things slowly returned to normal, though normal looked a lot different now. The new HOA board, with Frank as president and Susan as treasurer, ran things in a much more transparent way. They published detailed financial reports every quarter. They held open forums where residents could voice concerns, and they completely rewrote the CCRs to eliminate vague language that could be abused. The approved contractor list was gone for good. Residents were free to hire whoever they wanted as long as the work was done by licensed professionals and met building codes. The HOA would still approve or deny projects based on aesthetic guidelines, but the focus was on the end result, not who did the work. Jake's business absolutely exploded. After the story made the news, he got calls from all over the Phoenix metro area. He had to hire 3 new employees just to keep up with demand. He always made sure to mention in interviews that his break came from doing honest work at fair prices, which was a not-so-subtle dig at companies that tried to overcharge customers. As for me, I became something of a neighborhood folk hero, which was weird and a little uncomfortable. People would stop me at the grocery store or the gas station to thank me for standing up to the HOA. I got invited to neighborhood barbecues and block parties. One family even named their new dog after me, which was both flattering and strange. But more importantly, I had learned something valuable about community and standing up for what's right. When I had first moved to Sunset Ridge, I had kept to myself, viewing the HOA as an annoying but necessary evil. I didn't know my neighbors, and I didn't really care to get involved. The fence situation had forced me out of my comfort zone. It had made me engage with my community, talk to people, build relationships, and work together toward a common goal. In fighting Patricia's corruption, I had inadvertently helped create a much stronger, more connected neighborhood. The following spring, the new HOA board organized the neighborhood's first annual block party. It was held on a Saturday in April when the weather was perfect, warm but not too hot, with clear blue skies. Someone rented a bounce house for the kids. Frank grilled burgers and hot dogs, and several people brought side dishes and desserts. A local band set up in the community center parking lot and played classic rock covers. I was standing near the grill, talking to Jake about a potential addition I wanted to make to my house, when Susan came over with a beer for each of us. "I wanted to make a toast," she said, raising her bottle, "to William for having the courage to stand up when the rest of us were too scared. You changed this neighborhood for the better." People nearby heard and gathered around, raising their own drinks. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "Come on, Susan, I just fixed my fence." "You did a lot more than that," Frank said, joining the group. "You exposed corruption, you stood up to intimidation, and you showed everyone here that we don't have to accept being taken advantage of. That takes guts." More people were gathering now, and someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping, and I was standing there feeling incredibly awkward but also genuinely touched. All right, I said, trying to deflect. "I appreciate it, but honestly, this was a group effort. Everyone here who spoke up at those meetings, who filed complaints, who voted out the old board, you all made this happen. I just got the ball rolling." "By being stubborn and refusing to back down," Jake added with a grin, "which is very on brand for you." Everyone laughed, including me. The toast was made, beers were drunk, and the party continued. Kids ran around playing tag, adults stood in clusters chatting and laughing, and for the first time since I had moved to this neighborhood, it actually felt like a community. Later that evening, as the sun was setting and the party was winding down, I found myself sitting on the community center steps with Frank. He had a satisfied look on his face as he surveyed the neighborhood. "You know what the best part of all this is?" he asked. "What's that?" 3 years ago, when I tried to fight the HOA, I felt so alone. I thought I was the only one who saw what was happening, and when I couldn't keep up with the legal fees, I felt like I had failed. But you showed me that I wasn't alone. All these people were feeling the same way, they just needed someone to take the first step. You took the first step too, Frank. You tried to fight them. Yeah, but I didn't succeed. You did. And in doing so, you gave everyone else the courage to join the fight. That's leadership. I thought about that for a moment. Leadership. It wasn't a term I would have used to describe myself. I was just a guy who got mad about an unfair fine and refused to be pushed around. But I guess sometimes that's what leadership is, being willing to stand up even when it's uncomfortable, even when you might lose, because the alternative is accepting injustice. "So, what's next for you?" Frank asked. "Now that you're the neighborhood's resident crusader against corruption." I laughed. I think I'm going to focus on living a quiet life. Maybe add that patio to my backyard. Do some traveling. I've had enough drama for a while. Good plan. Though knowing you, if something else comes up that needs fixing, you won't be able to help yourself." He was probably right about that. The rest of that year passed peacefully. I did add the patio to my backyard, and yes, I hired Jake to do it at a fair price with no interference from the HOA. I also started dating again, something I hadn't done much of since my divorce. I met a woman named Allison Martin at a local coffee shop, and we hit it off. She thought the whole HOA story was hilarious and called me her crusading knight, which I found both embarrassing and endearing. The last I heard about Patricia, she was serving her sentence at the Perryville prison complex in Goodyear. Richard was at the state prison in Florence, and Linda was at a minimum security facility in Tucson. They would all be eligible for parole eventually, but the damage to their reputations was permanent. Even after they served their time, they would be convicted felons with fraud on their records. Their days of scamming homeowners were over. Desert Home Solutions and Premium Property Services both went out of business. Their contractor licenses were revoked by the state, and they faced multiple civil lawsuits from former customers seeking restitution. As far as I know, both Richard and Linda ended up declaring bankruptcy. Meanwhile, contractors like Jake, who did honest work at fair prices, were thriving. Several other honest contractors in the area also saw their businesses grow as word spread about the importance of fair pricing and quality work. In a weird way, the whole scandal had been good for the local contracting industry, at least for those who operated ethically. The Sunset Ridge HOA's lawsuit against Patricia, Richard, and Linda was settled out of court. Between the criminal restitution and the civil settlement, the HOA recovered about $450,000, enough to cover most of what had been stolen plus legal fees. The money was used to make long-needed improvements to the community, including resurfacing the pool, upgrading the playground equipment, and establishing a reserve fund for future maintenance. Property values in Sunset Ridge actually increased after the scandal, which surprised everyone. Apparently, prospective buyers liked the idea of moving into a neighborhood with a transparent, well-run HOA. The story of residents banding together to fight corruption became a selling point rather than a black mark. One afternoon, about 18 months after the whole thing started, I was in my backyard enjoying the new patio when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Hello. Hi, is this William Garrison speaking?" "Mr. Garrison, my name is Tom Fletcher. I'm a resident in a neighborhood called Oak Grove, about 15 miles from you. I'm calling because we're having some issues with our HOA, and someone told me you might be able to offer some advice." I listened as Tom explained a situation that sounded eerily familiar. His HOA was requiring residents to use approved landscaping companies that charged triple the normal rates. He suspected the HOA president was getting kickbacks, but he didn't know how to prove it or what to do about it. I spent about an hour on the phone with Tom, walking him through everything I had learned. I told him about researching the CCRs, gathering evidence, talking to neighbors, and organizing collective action. I gave him David's contact information and suggested he consult with a lawyer before taking any major steps. I also told him about the public records requests and how we had uncovered the relationship between Patricia and Richard Morrison. "The key is documentation," I explained. "Get everything in writing. Take photos, save emails, record conversations if Arizona's one-party consent law allows it, and most importantly, don't do this alone. Find other residents who feel the same way and organize. there's strength in numbers. This is incredibly helpful, Tom said gratefully. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. No problem. And hey, if you need any contractor recommendations, I know some good people who charge fair prices. After we hung up, I sat on my patio thinking about that conversation. Part of me was tired of HOA drama and wanted nothing to do with anyone else's problems. But a bigger part of me was glad I could help. If my experience could prevent someone else from being exploited, then all the stress and hassle had been worth it. Over the next few months, I got several more calls like that. Word had apparently spread through the greater Phoenix area about what had happened in Sunset Ridge, and people in similar situations were reaching out for advice. I helped where I could, though I made it clear I wasn't a lawyer or a professional activist. I was just a guy who had fought his own battle and was willing to share what I had learned. In some cases, the situations resolved quickly once the HOA boards realized residents were informed and organized. In other cases, it turned into longer struggles similar to what we had gone through. But in every instance, I emphasized the importance of staying legal, documenting everything, and working together. One evening, Allison and I were having dinner at a nice restaurant in Scottsdale when she asked me something that made me stop and think. You regret any of it? Fighting the HOA, I mean. It caused you a lot of stress, you got sued, you had to testify in court. Was it worth it? I thought carefully before answering. You know, at the time, there were definitely moments when I wondered if I should have just paid the overpriced contractors and moved on with my life. It would have been easier, but looking back now, no, I don't regret it at all. What Patricia was doing was wrong, and she was hurting a lot of people. If I hadn't stood up to her, she'd probably still be doing it. That's what I love about you, Allison said, reaching across the table to take my hand. You have this very strong sense of right and wrong, and you're not afraid to act on it. It's gotten me in trouble more than once, I admitted. Maybe, but it's also made a real difference in people's lives. That's worth something. She was right. It was worth something. In fact, it was worth a lot. As I write this now, it's been over 2 years since that first violation notice appeared in my mailbox. My fence still looks great, the cedar aging beautifully in the Arizona sun. My backyard patio is one of my favorite places to spend time, especially on cool evenings when the temperature drops, and the sky turns that particular shade of orange and purple that you only get in the desert. The Sunset Ridge HOA is now a model of how homeowner associations should operate: transparent, responsive to residents, and focused on genuinely maintaining property values rather than lining the pockets of board members. Frank is still president, and he jokes that he's going to serve until someone physically drags him out of the position. Jake's contracting business is booming to the point where he's considering opening a second location in Temp. He still gives me the friends and family discount, though I always tip him extra because I know he'd do the work for free if I let him. Susan ended up running for city council, and won. She says her experience taking down the corrupt HOA board gave her a taste for public service and holding people accountable. I have no doubt she'll do great things. As for me, I'm just living my life. I go to work, spend time with Allison, keep up my house, and enjoy the community I'm part of. I'm no longer just a resident who keeps to himself. I'm an active member of this neighborhood, someone who knows his neighbors and looks out for them. And if another HOA somewhere decides to pull the same kind of scam that Patricia tried, well, there are a lot more people now who know how to fight back, who understand their rights, and who won't be intimidated. That might be the best outcome of this whole experience. It wasn't just about fixing one corrupt HOA. It was about empowering people to stand up for themselves and demand better. The violation notice that started all of this is still in a drawer in my office. I keep it as a reminder of where this journey began and how far we've come. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, marveling at how such a simple thing, a demand to use overpriced contractors to fix a fence, could snowball into arrests, trials, and real systemic change. Life has a funny way of working out. 2 years ago, I was a divorced guy who just wanted to fix his fence in peace. Today, I'm part of a thriving community in a healthy relationship, and I've become someone that people turn to when they need help standing up to injustice. I didn't set out to be any kind of hero or activist. I just refused to be taken advantage of, and that simple act of defiance changed everything. The HOA demanded I use their contractor only. So I hired a better company and they lost half their clients. But more than that, they lost their power, their freedom, and their scam. And my neighborhood gained something much more valuable in return. Justice isn't always swift, and fighting for what's right isn't always easy. But it's always worth it. That's the lesson I learned from a damaged fence and a corrupt HOA president. And it's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.